where the rain feels like home. The city did not sleep, it vibrated. For Clara, the hum of high-voltage wires and the screech of subway brakes had become a second heartbeat, one that beat too fast and felt far too hollow. She stood at her window, 20 stories above the pavement, watching the neon lights bleed into the smog. Her reflection was a ghost, pale, shadowed, and thinning at the edges from years of deadlines that never truly ended. Burnout isn't a sudden fire. It is a slow dampening of the soul until the wood is too wet to catch a spark. Clara looked at her desk, cluttered with blueprints for buildings she didn't care about, and coffee cups that had grown cold hours ago. The blue light of her monitor washed over her face, highlighting the weariness in her eyes. She felt like a clock with a stripped gear, spinning and spinning but moving nowhere. In the back of her desk drawer, tucked beneath a stack of unpaid invoices, sat an old brass key tied to a faded green ribbon. It belonged to a cottage in the Pacific Northwest, a place her grandfather had called the rain catcher. He used to say that some people are made of sunshine, but others are made of the mist, and they need the clouds to feel whole. Clara traced the cold metal of the key, and for the first time in years, she took a deep breath. The resignation was a single paragraph. The packing took only an hour. Clara realized that her life in the city was mostly made of things she didn't need. She left the designer furniture and the noise behind, taking only a suitcase, her old charcoal pencils, and the brass key. As she locked her apartment door for the last time, the silence of the hallway felt like a promise. The train ride was a transition between worlds. As the concrete gave way to the bruised purples of the mountains and the deep greens of the forest, the air began to change. Clara pressed her face to the window, watching the first droplets of rain streak across the glass. They weren't the dirty gray streaks of the city. They were clear, like liquid diamonds, chasing each other toward the earth. She arrived at the station under a sky the color of a dove's wing. The station was nothing more than a wooden platform and a rusted sign. As she stepped off the train, the smell hit her. Cedar, wet stone, and the sharp, clean scent of ozone. It was a smell that didn't demand anything from her. It simply existed, inviting her to do the same. The walk to the cottage was 3 miles of winding dirt paths. The rain began to fall in earnest now, a steady, rhythmic tapping on the canopy of leaves above. Clara didn't open her umbrella. She let the water soak into her coat, feeling the weight of it, the reality of it. It felt like the earth was reaching out to touch her, reminding her that she was still there. The cottage was smaller than she remembered, huddled under the protection of a massive, ancient oak tree. Its cedar shingles were dark with moisture, and moss grew in thick velvet patches on the roof. It looked less like a house and more like a natural outcropping of the woods. Clara turned the key in the lock, and the door creaked open with a welcoming groan. Inside, the air was still and smelled of dried lavender and old books. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the grime-streaked windows. Clara didn't turn on the lights. She walked to the hearth and knelt, clearing away the old ash. She felt the heavy silence of the house settling over her shoulders like a blanket. That first night, the rain turned into a deluge. It hammered on the tin roof of the porch, a chaotic and beautiful symphony. Clara lay on the old sofa, wrapped in a moth-eaten wool quilt. For the first time in years, the to-do list in her head went silent. The rain was doing all the work for her, washing the world clean while she simply slept. The next morning, the world was wrapped in a thick, white fog. Clara stepped onto the porch and saw a figure standing near the edge of her garden. It was Arlo, an old man with a beard like seafoam and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the forest. He held a wooden crate filled with bright red apples and a thermos that steamed in the cold air. "Your grandfather always said you'd come back when the noise got too loud," Arlo said, his voice a low rumble. He handed her an apple. It was cold and crisp, bursting with a sweetness that tasted of the earth. He didn't ask her why she was there or how long she would stay. In the woods, time was measured by seasons, not minutes. Days bled into weeks. Clara's routine became dictated by the light. She woke when the sun turned the fog into a glowing gold veil. She spent her mornings cleaning the cottage, scrubbing away the years of neglect. Her hands, once soft from keyboard clicking, became calloused and stained with the juice of berries and the soot of the fire. One afternoon, she sat by the window with her old sketchbook. She stared at the white page for hours. The city had taught her to draw for efficiency, for profit, for the approval of others. Now, with no one watching, she realized she didn't know what she wanted to see. The blankness was terrifying. It was a mirror reflecting her own emptiness. She threw the pencil down and walked out into the rain. She didn't stop until she reached the creek at the edge of the property. The water was rushing, swollen by the storm, tumbling over jagged rocks. She stood on the bank, letting the downpour drench her through. She realized she had been trying to stay dry her entire life, trying to keep her emotions neatly tucked away. "It's okay to be overwhelmed," she whispered to the trees. "The forest is overwhelmed every time it rains, and it only grows stronger for it." She sat down on a wet log, her clothes heavy and cold, and finally she cried. She cried for the years lost to neon lights and the hollow ache in her chest. The rain carried her tears away before they could even hit her cheeks. When she returned to the cottage, Arlo was there, chopping wood in the shed. He didn't say anything about her soaked clothes. He simply handed her a dry towel and pointed toward the stove. "The rain doesn't ask for permission," he said, "and neither should you." That evening, Clara found a small jar of indigo pigment in a cupboard. She mixed it with a cup of rainwater she had caught in a bowl on the porch. She took her sketchbook and, instead of drawing straight lines and sharp angles, she let the wet brush dance. She painted the shape of the mist, the way the light died in the trees, and the rhythm of the rain on the roof. The roof had a leak over the kitchen. On a gray Tuesday, Clara climbed a ladder, guided by Arlo from below. She felt the rough cedar shingles under her palms and the cool wind tugging at her hair. Fixing the leak wasn't about perfection, it was about protection. It was about making sure this small corner of the world stayed safe and dry. "Why do you stay here, Arlo?" Clara asked as they sat on the porch steps later, drinking tea. "Because here, I am not a resource or a consumer," Arlo replied, watching a robin splash in a puddle. "I am just a part of the landscape. The rain doesn't care about my bank account, and the trees don't care about my age. I am home because I am allowed to just be." Clara began to notice the morning light wasn't just one color. Some days it was a sharp, piercing silver that cut through the leaves. Other days it was a soft, buttery yellow that made the moss look like glowing embers. She started waking up early just to watch the light reclaim the world from the shadows, a daily miracle she had ignored for a decade. She spent a whole afternoon making soup from carrots and onions she had grown in the small garden patch Arlo helped her clear. The act of chopping, simmering, and tasting felt like a prayer. It was a slow process that couldn't be hurried. The soup tasted of patience and the soft, damp earth. One morning, the rain stopped entirely. The silence was startling. Clara walked out into the meadow behind the cottage. The air was heavy with the scent of wild lilies. Every leaf and blade of grass held a single trembling drop of water. The world was a gallery of tiny mirrors, each reflecting the pale blue of the clearing sky. She looked at her hands. They were scarred, stained, and strong. She looked toward the horizon, where the mountains stood like ancient guardians. She realized she didn't miss the city. She didn't miss the person she was forced to be there. The burnout hadn't been an end. It had been a clearing of the brush to let the new forest grow. The rain began to fall again, a gentle drizzle that kissed her skin. Clara didn't run for cover. She stood in the center of the path, a small, vibrant part of a much larger story. She wasn't lost anymore. She wasn't running. She had finally found the place where the shadows were soft and the water was kind. She had found where the rain feels like home.